The M1028 canister shell detonates. 1,000 tungsten balls vaporize the Confederate front line instantly. But the killbox is collapsing. Main gun, Winchester. Coax MG, fused from heat. Optics, blinded by thick black powder smoke. The 21st century Predator is now a blind 70-ton paperweight. Enemy infantry swarmed the hull, hammering bayonets against the reactive armor, clawing for a way inside. The crew draws M4 carbines for close quarters defense. What happens when the ammo runs dry against 12,000 men? But to understand how modern technology ended up in this hell, we need to rewind the clock. July 3, 1863, 1300 hours. The humidity on Cemetery Ridge sits at a suffocating 90%. Ambient temperature exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The Army of the Potomac holds the high ground, but the situation is precarious. Union logistics are strained. Brigadier General Henry Hunt orders a ceasefire along the center of the line to conserve ordnance. The Union batteries fall silent, barrel temperatures slowly dropping. The silence is deceptive. Across the Emmitsburg Road, movement is detected in the tree line of Seminary Ridge. General Robert E. Lee plays his final card. 12,000 Confederate infantrymen step into the open. It is a mile-wide front of gray wool and steel bayonets. Pettigrew and Trimble on the left, Pickett on the right. They align their formations with drill ground precision, ignoring the stifling heat. The visual magnitude of the assault is absolute. Union soldiers behind the stone wall at the angle grip their Springfield rifles. They understand the physics of the engagement. At this range, the smoothbore artillery is ineffective, but soon the canister shot will turn the field into a kill zone. The Confederate momentum builds. A low, rhythmic tramp of boots on dry grass echoes across the valley. The high watermark of the Confederacy approaches its apex. 13:15 hours. A meteorological anomaly manifests directly above the Union center, 50 yards north of the copse of trees. The wind dies instantly. Barometric pressure plummets, causing eardrums to pop among the defending troops of the 71st Pennsylvania. Static electricity spikes. Hair stands on end. Iron rifle barrels begin to hum with induced current. The smell of sulfur and black powder is violently displaced by the sharp metallic scent of ozone. A sphere of refractive distortion expands 3 meters above the ground. Light bends around the singularity. Reality fractures. The air ruptures with a sound like a cracking whip, louder than a 12-pounder Napoleon cannon. The object impacts the earth. 70 tons of composite armor slam onto the Pennsylvania soil. The ground shudders, registering a localized seismic event. A cloud of dry dust and pulverized sod billows outward, obscuring the impact site. As the debris settles, the silhouette emerges. It is angular, alien, and massive. An M1A2 Seb V3 Abrams main battle tank. The machine sits motionless in the tall grass, facing west toward the advancing Confederate line. Its desert tan CARC paint stands out starkly against the lush greenery of the ridge. The vehicle is outfitted with a Tusk II survival kit. Curved reactive armor tiles cover the side skirts like reptilian scales. The 120mm M256 smoothbore cannon points neutrally toward the horizon. The coaxial M240 machine gun and the commander's independent thermal viewer sit high on the turret, glass optics glinting in the 19th century sun. Time dilates. The Confederate advance falters. Thousands of men freeze, their brains unable to process the geometry of the object before them. It resembles an ironclad ship dragged onto land, but the engineering is impossible. No rivets, no smokestacks, just smooth, sloped slabs of Chobham armor and depleted uranium mesh. Inside the hull, the modern crew wakes to a nightmare. Systems reboot. Digital displays flicker to life in the darkness of the turret. The driver checks his vision blocks, seeing only open fields and soldiers in archaic uniforms. The commander's tactical display shows 0 GPS satellites connected. The Blue Force tracker is dead. Confusion reigns for 3 seconds. Then, training overrides panic. The driver engages the master switch. The AGT 1500 gas turbine engine ignites. It does not chug like a steam locomotive. It screams. A high-pitched, piercing whine climbs the frequency spectrum, settling into a deep, resonant jet engine roar. The sound creates a physical pressure wave. Heat haze shimmers from the rear exhaust grill, distorting the air temperature to over 300 degrees instantly. On the field, the Confederate horses panic. The distinct, terrifying sound of the turbine cuts through the battlefield noise. It is the sound of future warfare. The Union troops near the wall scramble back, terrified of the beast that has appeared in their midst. The Abrams comes online. The hydraulic turret drive engages with a mechanical hiss. The massive turret, weighing 20 tons on its own, begins to rotate. It traverses left, then right, scanning for threats. The gunner peers through the primary sight. He switches to thermal imaging. The monochromatic display lights up. In the distance, 12,000 distinct heat signatures glow white-hot against the cool background of the woods. The laser rangefinder pulses. The commander assesses the threat level. He perceives a massive infantry formation advancing in the open. No armor support, no air support. He identifies them as hostiles. The crew operates as a single biological and mechanical unit. The loader reaches for the ready rack. The safety door slides open. He pulls a canister. It is not a solid shot. It is an M1028 canister round, packed with 1,100 tungsten balls. The breech block drops. The round is rammed home. The breech rises and locks. The tank is Oscar Mike. The driver shifts the transmission into drive. The tracks, equipped with rubber pads, bite into the soft earth. The suspension torsion bars flex under the immense weight. The Abrams lurches forward, cresting the ridge. It stands alone between the Army of the Potomac and the Army of Northern Virginia. The turbine howls, announcing the end of the age of the musket. The battlefield creates a temporal paradox. On one side, the primitive industrial capability of the mid-19th century. On the other, the apex of 21st century aerospace-grade metallurgy. The M1A2 SEP V3 Abrams sits hull down behind a stone wall near the angle. It is a 73-ton displacement of reality. The Honeywell AGT 1500 multi-fuel gas turbine engine idles at a piercing 30,000 RPM. The sound is not the chugging of a steam locomotive familiar to the infantry of 1863. It is a high-frequency shriek, a jet engine tethered to the earth, generating 1,500 shaft horsepower. Heat haze ripples from the rear exhaust grills, distorting the air, pushing thermal signatures well into the infrared spectrum. Opposing this monolith is the pride of the Confederate artillery, the model 1857 12-pounder Napoleon. Bronze smoothbore. The crew rams a powder bag and a solid cast-iron shot down the muzzle. They spike the vent. They fire. The physics of the engagement dictate the outcome before the fuse even ignites. The 12-pound ball leaves the cannon at a muzzle velocity of 1,440 feet per second. It carries approximately 250 kilojoules of kinetic energy. It is a lethally effective projectile against oak planks, limestone walls, and formations of infantry clad in wool and cotton. Against the Abrams, it is irrelevant. Ballistic trajectory analysis. The iron sphere arcs across the mile of open ground. It strikes the Abrams on the frontal glacis plate. The impact dynamics are absolute. The Abrams armor package, third-generation Chobham Composite, reinforced with a mesh of depleted uranium and graphite coating, is rated at over 900 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor equivalent against kinetic threats. The Confederate projectile does not penetrate. It does not spoil. It does not crack the ceramic matrix. The iron ball strikes the ultra-hardened surface and shatters, disintegrating into harmless fragmentation. The kinetic transfer is negligible. Inside the fighting compartment, the crew registers the impact as a dull thud, barely audible over the turbine's whine and the internal communication loop. The suspension system, designed to absorb the recoil of a 120mm gun, does not even compress. The paint is scratched, the threat is zero. Contrast this with the offensive capability of the SEB V3. The gunner grips the control handles. The main armament is the M256A1 120mm smoothbore cannon. The loader indexes an M8U9A4 armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding Sayboat APFSDS round. This is the silver bullet. The propellant casing burns in milliseconds, generating chamber pressures exceeding 5,000 bars. The penetrator leaves the barrel at over 5,500 feet per second, Mach 5. It moves nearly 4 times faster than the Confederate cannonball. The depleted uranium dart is a kinetic energy weapon. It carries no explosives. It relies on sheer density and velocity. Upon impact with any material existing in 1863, bronze, iron, wood, or flesh, the physics of the collision act more like fluid dynamics. The sabot round does not just penetrate, it liquefies the target medium through hydrostatic shock. A hit on a Napoleon cannon would vaporize the bronze tube and convert the artillery crew into biological mist instantly. But the disparity is not just in ballistics, it is in information dominance. The battlefield at Gettysburg is rapidly consumed by the white sulfuric fog of black powder discharge. Visibility for the Confederate line drops to less than 50 meters. Officers rely on shouting and bugle calls. They are fighting blind. The Abrams commander operates in a different electromagnetic spectrum. He activates the CITV, the commander's independent thermal viewer. The optics cycle to white hot. The smoke of black powder is transparent to thermal imaging. On the commander's display, the battlefield is crisp, high contrast, and terrifyingly clear. The heat signatures of 12,000 men glow bright white against the cool background of the Pennsylvania grass. Every heartbeat, every exertion, every warm rifle barrel is visible. The commander can distinguish individual officers by the heat plume of their horses. The laser rangefinder sends a pulse of light, calculating the distance to the enemy center line, 1,400 meters. The fire control system instantly computes the ballistic solution, adjusting for air temperature, barometric pressure, crosswind, and even the curvature of the earth. The crosshairs lock onto the target. The gun stabilizes, the turret hydraulics hissing as they compensate for the tank's micro-movements. The reticle does not drift. The Confederate infantry advances into the kill zone, marching shoulder to shoulder. Their effective engagement range with rifled muskets is perhaps 300 meters on a good day. The Abrams has them ranged, targeted, and analyzed from a distance where the tank appears as nothing more than a blurred shape on the horizon. The Tusk, Tank Urban Survival Kit, armor tiles on the side skirts add another layer of reactive protection, useless against musket balls, but visually intimidating, giving the tank a scaled, reptilian appearance. The Crows, common remotely operated weapon station, atop the turret, tracks movement independently, its 50 caliber heavy machine gun slaved to the thermal optics. The math is cold. The engagement envelope of the Abrams engulfs the entire Confederate line, while the Confederate envelope ends a kilometer short of the tank's hull. This is not a battle. It is an industrial accident waiting to resolve. The technological gap is not measured in years but in joules, kelvins, and meters per second. The simulation continues. July 3rd, 1863, 1500 hours. The humidity hangs heavy over Cemetery Ridge. The silence following the artillery barrage is broken not by bugles, but by the high-pitched 60-decibel whine of a Honeywell AGT 1500 gas turbine engine. The M1A2 SEP V3 Abrams sits hull down behind a stone wall, a 70-ton Predator waking from its idle state. Down the slope, the Army of Northern Virginia begins its advance, 12,000 men, a grey carpet of wool and steel stretching across a mile of open ground. To the Confederate officer corps, observing through brass telescopes, the silhouette of the Abrams is incomprehensible. They interpret the angular reactive armor tiles of the Tusk system and the massive turret as a new, formidable Union ironclad siege engine, inexplicably beached on the high ground. They do not halt. The order is given. The high water mark of the Confederacy steps off. Inside the Abrams, the environment is sterile, illuminated by the glow of multifunction LCD displays. The air conditioning hums, fighting the Pennsylvania summer heat. The commander scans the battlefield through the independent thermal viewer. In the monochrome green and black of the optical sensors, the advancing Confederate line is not a group of human beings. It is a mass of high-contrast thermal signatures. The laser rangefinder pulses. The return signal feeds into the ballistic computer. Range, 800 meters. Closing. The crosswind sensor on the turret roof samples the air. The computer calculates the firing solution in microseconds, adjusting for barometric pressure, propellant temperature, and barrel droop. The commander makes the tactical decision. High-explosive anti-tank rounds are inefficient against dispersed infantry. The call is made for the M1028 canister round. The loader, working with practiced mechanical efficiency, hits the knee switch to open the blast door. He pulls the M1028 from the ready rack. It looks like a standard 120mm shell, but inside the composite casing, it holds a payload of 1,100 tungsten spheres, effectively a shotgun shell the size of a fire extinguisher. He rams the round into the breech of the M256A1 smoothbore gun. The breech block slides up, locking the ammunition in the chamber with a metallic clank that vibrates through the chassis. Up, the loader signals. The gunner grips the control handles. The turret stabilization system keeps the reticle glued to the center of the Confederate mass, regardless of the tank's minute vibrations. The advancing infantry is now at 500 meters, point-blank range for modern ballistics. The gunner squeezes the triggers. The firing pin strikes the primer. The combustible case ignites. Pressure in the chamber spikes to over 5,000 bars. The M1028 projectile accelerates down the barrel, exiting the muzzle at 1,410 meters per second. Upon exiting the muzzle, the casing strips away. The physics of the engagement shift instantly from ballistics to fluid dynamics. The 1,100 tungsten balls begin to spread. At 500 meters, the dispersion pattern creates a lethal cone roughly the width of a football field. The effect on the Confederate line is not suppression, it is erasure. The tungsten spheres, traveling faster than the speed of sound, slam into the densely packed ranks of Pettigrew's and Pickett's divisions. There is no cover. The soft lead of a mini-ball deforms on impact. Tungsten does not. The projectiles carry enough kinetic energy to perforate the front rank, pass through the second, and neutralize the third. A visually distinct void appears in the center of the Confederate formation. Hundreds of combatants are instantly removed from the order of battle. The air fills with a fine red mist. Biological matter atomized by the sheer velocity of the impact. Banners, muskets, and officers cease to exist. The acoustic shockwave of the 120mm blast rolls over the field a split second later, a thunderclap that drowns out the rebel yell. But the tank is not finished. The commander designates the Common Remotely Operated Weapon Station, the CROWS system, mounted on the turret roof. It holds an M2HB 50 caliber heavy machine gun. The commander does not need to expose himself to return fire. He operates the weapon via a control grip and a screen inside the turret. The Crow's system slews with robotic precision. The electric servos whine as the thermal optic locks onto movement. The M2HP opens up. The rhythmic, heavy thumping of the Ma-Deuce begins. Each 50 caliber BMG round carries roughly 18,000 joules of energy. The rounds tear through the smoke, ignoring the chaotic return fire of Confederate Enfields, whose lead bores shatter harmlessly against the Abrams' depleted uranium and Chobham armor matrix. Simultaneously, the gunner activates the coaxial M240C machine gun mounted alongside the main cannon. The 7.62mm weapon adds a high rate of fire buzzsaw to the heavy percussion of the 50 cal. The Confederate advance stalls. This is not a rout, it is cognitive failure. The soldiers facing this mechanical leviathan cannot process the level of violence being inflicted upon them. They have been trained to march into musket fire, to brave canister from bronze cannons. They have not been trained to walk into a stream of computer-controlled heavy metal. The Abrams crew operates in a rhythm of detached professionalism. The loader retrieves another M1028. Load. The breech locks. The gunner laces a surviving flank of Kemper's brigade. The ballistic computer updates the solution. The tank's suspension rocks gently as the main gun roars again. Another cone of tungsten sweeps the field. The tall grass is mowed down along with the infantry. The ground is churned into mud mixed with debris. From the Confederate perspective, there is no enemy to fight. There is only a stone wall and a monster that breathes fire. The psychological impact outweighs the physical destruction. Men drop their weapons not out of cowardice, but out of a primal realization that they are engaging in a conflict against the force of nature. The commander rotates the CITV, checking the perimeter. No threats detected on the flanks. The Abrams is an island of invulnerability. The coaxial machine gun chatters in short, controlled bursts, conserving barrel temperature while maintaining suppression. The field in front of the Union line is rapidly becoming a stillness. The smoke from the canister rounds hangs low, obscuring the carnage. Through the thermal sights, the gunner watches the heat signatures fade or retreat. The charge has been broken, not by the courage of the Union infantry, but by the cold, mathematical application of superior firepower. The loader slides a third round into the chamber. The crew waits. The turbine winds on. The tactical situation at the high water mark disintegrates into chaos. Operational cohesion on the Union line is straining, but the focal point of the battle remains a lone M1A2 SEP V3 Abrams sitting hull down near the copse of trees. The Confederates are no longer a distant formation. They are a tidal wave of grey wool and steel, 12,000 strong, compressing toward the center. The range closes to within 200 meters. The Abrams is no longer fighting a battle. It is managing a resource crisis. Inside the turret, the atmosphere is a toxic blend of recycled air, cordite fumes, and human sweat. The loader is a critical point of failure in the firing cycle. He is operating on pure adrenaline. His movements are a blur of muscle memory. He hits the knee switch to drop the blast door. He grabs a 40-pound 120mm cartridge from the honeycomb rack. He flips it, rams it into the breech and clears the path. The breech block slams upward with a hydraulic hiss. He shouts that the gun is up. The gunner squeezes the triggers and the control handles. The M256 smoothbore cannon erupts. Outside, the physics of the M1028 canister round dictates the reality of the battlefield. Upon muzzle exit, the shell casing disintegrates, releasing over 1,000 tungsten balls. The effect is that of a giant shotgun. At this range, the dispersion pattern is lethal. The tungsten spread tears through the front ranks of Pickett's division. There is no cover. The kinetic energy of the tungsten shot does not wound. It obliterates. Biological targets are neutralized instantly. The momentum of the charge is arrested in sectors, but the sheer mass of the Confederate advance fills the gaps immediately. For every neutralized combatant, 2 more step over the fallen. Inside the tank, the ammo counter hits critical levels. The ready rack is empty. The loader is now pulling rounds from the semi-ready storage, adding precious seconds to the reload cycle. The commander checks the display. 42 main gun rounds expended. The tank is effectively Winchester on heavy ordnance. He orders the switch to coaxial engagement. The gunner toggles the weapon selection. The M240C machine gun mounted next to the main cannon begins the cycle. 7.62mm tracer fire draws a continuous line of orange light into the advancing mass. The rate of fire is sustained. The barrel temperature spikes rapidly. The steel glows a dull cherry red in the gloom of the turret interior. The gas regulator struggles to cycle the action against the thermal expansion of the components. A stoppage occurs. The bolt fails to seat. The gunner taps the forward assist, but the weapon is dead. A ruptured casing has fused to the chamber walls. The primary anti-infantry suppression tool is offline. The commander attempts to utilize the Crow system, the remote-operated 50 caliber machine gun on top of the turret. The joystick moves, the servos whine, but the feed chute is dry. The Abrams is out of ammunition. It is now a 70-ton paperweight in the path of a relentless infantry assault. The environment turns hostile to the tank's sensors. The battlefield of 1863 runs on black powder. The combustion produces thick, greasy white smoke. It hangs low over the ground, devoid of wind to clear it. Thousands of muskets discharging simultaneously create an artificial fog. The Abrams optics are designed for the clean, smokeless powder of the 21st century. The external lenses of the gunner's primary sight and the commander's independent thermal viewer begin to foul. Soot accumulates on the glass. The thermal imaging struggles. The heat signature of the battlefield is a washed-out white noise. The ground is burning, the bodies are warm, the air is hot. The contrast degrades. The targeting reticon floats in a sea of grey static. The crew is losing situational awareness. The Confederate infantry reaches the hull. They do not stop. They surge around the sides of the vehicle like water around the rock. The proximity sensors scream constant warnings. The commander views the external cameras through the internal monitors. The feed is terrifying. Men in grey uniforms are climbing the tracks. They scramble onto the glacis plate. They are hammering on the Tusk reactive armor tiles with rifle butts and bayonets. The sound resonates inside the hull like hail on a tin roof, a constant metallic clanging. The psychological barrier of the tank's invulnerability begins to crack, not for the crew, but for the attackers. They realize the beast has stopped biting. Emboldened, they swarm the turret. An officer in grey draws a revolver and fires point-blank into the commander's vision block. The bullet shatters against the ballistic glass, leaving a spiderweb crack that obscures the view. They are clawing at the hatches, trying to pry open the heavy steel locks with bayonets. They are looking for a way in. Inside, the crew draws personal weapons. M4 carbines are pulled from the racks. The commander realizes that if they open the hatch to engage, they will be overrun instantly. The tank is an island. The defensive perimeter has collapsed to the thickness of the Chobham armor. Static defense is no longer a viable strategy. The vehicle must transition from a firing platform to a kinetic weapon. The commander relays the order to the driver. Engage transmission. Drop the hammer. The driver shifts the Allison transmission into drive. He floors the accelerator. The Honeywell AGT 1500 gas turbine engine spools up to maximum RPM. The high-pitched whine pierces the roar of the battle, sounding like a jet aircraft preparing for takeoff. The torque converter locks up. 1500 horsepower is dumped instantly to the drive sprockets. The Abrams lurches forward. The sudden acceleration throws the Confederate soldiers on the hull off balance. They slide off the sloped armor, tumbling onto the tracks. The 70-ton machine does not glide. It crushes. The tracks dig into the soft Pennsylvania soil, churning earth and debris. The tank accelerates to 30 miles per hour. It is no longer avoiding obstacles. It is removing them. The Abrams plows into the dense formation of the Confederate center. The physics of the collision are absolute. Mass times velocity equals force. The tank strikes a horse-drawn artillery caisson. The wooden wheels shatter into splinters. The iron axle snaps like a twig. The ammunition inside the caisson detonates under the pressure, but the Abrams rose through the explosion, emerging from the smoke unscathed, the CARC paint scorched, but the armor intact. Confederate soldiers freeze. The sight of the iron monster moving with such unnatural speed defies their understanding of mechanics. It moves faster than a cavalry charge, yet it has the mass of a locomotive. It drifts sideways, the tracks throwing up walls of dirt, smashing through fence lines and stone walls without slowing down. The driver steers directly into the thickest concentration of the enemy advance. The psychological impact is immediate and catastrophic. The Confederate line does not bend, it breaks. Panic spreads contagiously. Men drop their rifles. The primal instinct to survive overrides the discipline of the drill. They cannot fight an earthquake. They cannot bayonet a hurricane. The tank becomes a battering ram, physically pushing the mass of the army backward. The Abrams clears a lane 50 meters wide through the center of the field, simply by existing in that space. The heat from the turbine exhaust, venting at over 1,000 degrees from the rear grille, sets the dry grass ablaze, creating a firewall that separates the retreating infantry from their commanders. The climax of the battle is not a final volley of musketry, but the roar of a turbine engine and the terrifying squeal of tracks grinding over the debris of the 19th century. The continuous roar of the M240C coaxial machine gun finally cuts out. The receiver smokes, the barrel radiating a dull cherry-red heat visible even in daylight. Inside the turret, the floor is a sea of spent 7.62mm brass casings and discarded 120mm combustible cartridge bases. The loader slumps against the breech guard, physical stamina depleted. The gunner scans the sector through the primary thermal sight. The display shows no active heat signatures advancing. The field before Cemetery Ridge is not just suppressed, it is sterilized. Pickett's charge has been dismantled at the molecular level. Where 12,000 Confederate infantrymen once marched in linear formation, only scattered debris and pockets of neutralized manpower remain. The casualty rate for the attacking force surpasses 80%. The psychological break is absolute. Survivors drop their Enfields and retreat in a disorganized rout, their minds unable to process the technological asymmetry they have just survived. On the Union line, the silence is deafening. Thousands of Federal troops stand behind the stone walls, muskets loaded but cold. Not a single percussion cap has been struck. They stare at the steel Leviathan sitting motionless in the valley. The M1A2 SEP V3 sits at a low idle, the Honeywell AGT 1500 turbine engine emitting a high-pitched whine that pierces the sudden quiet. The vehicle is covered in a layer of soot, dust, and scorched earth. The tusk reactive armor tiles are scarred but unbreached. The trophy system remains active, radar panels spinning, searching for threats that no longer exist. The tank commander checks the Force 21 Battle Command Brigade and below FBCB2 display. Fuel status is critical. Ammunition is dry. The mission clock hits 0. He signals the driver. The mission is complete. Suddenly, the atmospheric pressure plummets. The sky above Gettysburg darkens unnaturally, shifting from the grey of gunpowder smoke to a bruised, violent purple. The ozone smell returns, overpowering the stench of cordite and biological decay. Static electricity begins to arc across the tank's comms antennas. Digital displays inside the fighting compartment glitch and fracture. The commander's independent thermal viewer washes out in white noise. The Anomaly reclaims its asset. The driver shifts the transmission into neutral. Blue tendrils of energy, similar to St. Elmo's fire, dance along the 120mm smoothbore barrel. The 60-ton main battle tank begins to lose optical coherence. It does not drive away, it fades. The composite armor becomes translucent, revealing the skeleton of the chassis, before dissolving entirely into the rising mist. The turbine's whine drops in pitch until it vanishes into the wind. General Meade rides out to the engagement zone hours later. His horse refuses to go near the center of the valley. On the ground, the only physical evidence of the intervention remains: 2 deep, parallel ruts carved into the Pennsylvania soil. The dirt fused into glass by the heat of the tracks. Historical assessment: the timeline fractures. The Army of Northern Virginia is rendered combat ineffective instantly. Robert E. Lee, lacking the manpower to maneuver, surrenders at the Potomac 3 days later. The American Civil War concludes in July 1863. Industrialists from the north descend on the field to study the tread marks and the peculiar metallic residues left behind, accelerating the timeline of human engineering by decades. The legend of the Iron Ghost enters American folklore, a vengeful spirit of steel that descended from the heavens to preserve the Union. Final engagement tally: 1 M1A2 Abrams, 0 structural damage, 0 crew casualties. Total strategic victory.